The bookshop that opens at midnight. The city never truly slept, but it came close at midnight. Olivia had been walking for hours, trying to tire herself enough to actually rest when she got home. Insomnia had been her companion for months now, ever since the diagnosis, ever since the doctor had said treatable but serious, and handed her pamphlets about chemotherapy and clinical trials and making the most of whatever time she had left. She'd been 34 when life became suddenly finite, when the abstract concept of mortality became a timeline measured in months and treatment protocols. Tonight, like most nights, sleep felt impossible. So she walked through neighborhoods that changed from trendy to industrial to residential and back again, past restaurants closing their kitchens and bars, welcoming their regulars and homeless people, finding doorways for the night. And that's when she saw it. A bookshop. Not unusual in this part of the city, except that all the other shops had been closed for hours. This one had its lights on, warm, golden light spilling onto the sidewalk through windows stacked with books. And above the door, in silver letters that seemed to glow, the midnight pages. Olivia stopped. She'd walked this street before, dozens of times, and had never noticed this shop. But maybe she just hadn't been looking. Maybe she'd always been too focused on getting somewhere to notice what was right in front of her. A small sign in the window read, "Open only at midnight. Enter if you dare to choose." Choose what? Olivia wondered, but her hand was already reaching for the door. A bell chimed as she entered, not the electronic beep of modern shops, but an actual silver bell, its tone clear and sweet. The smell of old books enveloped her immediately, paper and leather and dust and time. But underneath that, something else. Something like cinnamon and starlight, if starlight had a scent. The shop was larger inside than it should have been. Shelves stretched impossibly far back, creating aisles that seemed to bend around corners that shouldn't exist in a space this size. Books filled every available surface, stacked in precarious towers, arranged in patterns that looked random but felt deliberate. "Welcome." The voice came from behind the counter, where a woman sat reading. She looked ageless, could have been 30 or 60, or anywhere in between. Her dark hair was wound into an elaborate braid, and her eyes, when she looked up, were the color of midnight itself. "I'm Celeste," she said. "I've been expecting you." "You... what?" "I didn't make an appointment. No one does. But everyone who finds this shop is expected. You're here because you need to choose." There was that word again. Choose what? Celeste closed her book and stood. She moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural, circling the counter to stand before Olivia. "A story. Your story. The one you're going to live?" Olivia laughed, but it came, out hollow. "I think my story's already been written. Terminal cancer doesn't leave much room for plot twists. Doesn't it?" Celeste tilted her head, studying Olivia with those impossible eyes. "Tell me, have you actually read your medical reports, or have you just been told what they say?" I don't understand. This shop contains every possible version of every person's life, all the paths they could take, all the choices they could make, all the ways their story might unfold. Most people walk past without seeing it, but those who truly need to choose, those who stand at a crossroads, even if they don't realize it, they find their way here. Olivia wanted to laugh again, wanted to walk out, wanted to dismiss this as some elaborate scam or her own exhaustion-induced hallucination. But something kept her rooted in place. Something about Celeste's eyes, about the impossible architecture of the shop, about the way the books seemed to whisper on their shelves. "Show me," she said finally. Celeste smiled. "Come." She led Olivia deeper into the shop, past shelves that seemed to reorganize themselves as they walked. The books rearranged, moving and shifting, creating a path that led to a section Olivia hadn't noticed before. Here, the books all looked the same, leather-bound volumes with no titles on their spines, distinguished only by different colored ribbons marking their pages: red, blue, green, gold, silver, black. "These are yours," Celeste said. "Each book contains a different version of your life, starting from this moment. Each color represents a different choice, a different path." Olivia reached for the red-ribboned book, but stopped. "What's the catch?" "There's always a catch." "No catch. You read, you choose, you live, but there are rules. You can only read 5 books. Any more, and you'll become paralyzed by possibility, unable to choose any path because you're too busy imagining all the others. And once you choose, you can't come back. You can't undo it. You live the story you select. What if I don't choose? What if I just walk away? Then you continue on your current path, the one where you believe cancer is a period at the end of your sentence, the one where you've already started dying because you think that's what you're supposed to do." The words stung because they were true. Since the diagnosis, Olivia had been moving through life like a ghost, already mourning herself, already saying goodbye. She'd quit her job, stopped seeing friends, let her apartment become a mausoleum of a life she was preparing to leave. 5 books, Olivia said. "And then I choose. And then you choose." Olivia pulled the red-ribboned book from the shelf. It fell open to the first page, and words appeared as if being written in real time. Olivia Martinez fights. She gets second opinions, third opinions, fourth. She finds an experimental treatment. The cancer goes into remission after 2 brutal years. She survives but is changed, harder, more isolated, afraid to let anyone close because loss feels too possible now. She lives alone until 67, when she dies of a heart attack, surrounded by impressive medical bills and not much else. Olivia closed the book, her hands shaking. That was survival, but it wasn't life, not really. She reached for the blue-ribboned book next. This one showed her traveling, spending every cent she had left, visiting places she'd always meant to see. Dying in a hospital in Thailand, broke, but with a memory card full of photos no one would look at after she was gone. The green book showed her making peace with death, entering hospice care, writing letters to people she loved, dying gracefully at 35, surrounded by family. It was beautiful and sad and absolutely terrifying. The gold book was different. In this version, she didn't die. The diagnosis had been wrong, a clerical error, a mixed-up lab result. She lived a normal life, got married, had kids, worked, a job she tolerated, and died at 83, having never known she'd been given a second chance. And the silver book showed her something impossible. In this version, she found the midnight bookshop earlier, before the diagnosis. She chose differently, made other decisions, and cancer never entered her story at all. She lived a completely different life, never knowing what she'd avoided. Olivia's hands trembled as she closed the silver book. 5 books, 5 possible futures, and somehow she had to choose which one to live. "This is impossible," she whispered. "Most things are," Celeste said, "until you choose to make them possible. But some of these contradict each other. The gold one says the diagnosis was wrong, but I've seen the scans myself. I've felt the tumor. It's real. Is it? Or have you just decided it is? Olivia, you're standing in a bookshop that doesn't exist on any map, reading books that write themselves, talking to a woman who doesn't age. And you're worried about medical scans?" Olivia wanted to argue but couldn't. Celeste was right. She'd already accepted the impossible by walking through that door. Why was it so hard to accept that her story could be rewritten? "There's one more," Celeste said quietly, pulling a black-ribboned book from the shelf. "I don't usually show this one, but I think you need to see it." Olivia took the black book with dread. She knew somehow what it would say before she opened it. The pages were dark, the words silver against black. Olivia Martinez gives up. She stops fighting, stops hoping, stops living before she actually dies. The cancer takes her in 4 months, but she's been gone long before that. She becomes a cautionary tale, a might have been, a story that ends too soon because she couldn't imagine any other ending. That was the path she was on now, the path she'd been walking since midnight months ago, when the doctor had called with test results and her old life had ended. Olivia closed the book and looked at Celeste. "How do I choose? How do I know which one is right?" "You don't. That's the terrifying, beautiful truth of it. You never know if you're making the right choice. You just choose, and then you make it right by how you live it." "What would you choose?" Celeste smiled sadly. "I chose a long time ago. I chose to be here, in this shop, helping others choose. I chose to exist between stories, holding space for people to write their own endings. It's not a choice I'd recommend for everyone, but it's mine." Olivia looked at the 6 books, the 5 she'd read, and the black one that showed her current trajectory. 6 possible futures, 6 versions of Olivia Martinez. Which one did she want to be? Not the black one. She knew that much. She hadn't walked into this impossible shop just to confirm that her current path led to a sad, quick ending. Not the blue one either. Dying alone on the other side of the world seemed romantic in theory, but lonely in practice. And not the silver one. As tempting as it was to imagine a life where cancer never happened, that wasn't her story. That was someone else's Olivia. Someone who'd never faced mortality, never been forced to reckon with what mattered. That left red, green, and gold. "Can I read them again?" Olivia asked. "Of course. Take your time. The shop doesn't close until you choose." Olivia reread the red book, the story of fighting and surviving, but at terrible cost. She reread the green book, the story of graceful acceptance and beautiful death. She reread the gold book, the story where the diagnosis was wrong and life continued normally. Each one had appeal. Each one had truth. Each one was a valid way forward. But as she read, she noticed something. The books were describing outcomes, but they weren't showing the journey. They were endings, not processes. And Olivia realized that what mattered wasn't just how her story ended, but how she lived the pages in between. "What if," she said slowly, "what if I don't choose any of these? What if I write my own?" Celeste's smile widened. "There it is, the question I've been waiting for you to ask." She reached beneath the counter and pulled out a 7th book. This one had no ribbon. Its pages were blank. This is the choice most people miss. They think they have to pick from the options presented. But the bravest choice is always to write your own story. Olivia took the blank book, and the moment her fingers touched it, words began to appear. Olivia Martinez chooses uncertainty. She fights when fighting feels right and rests when rest is needed. She lets people love her, even though love now means the possibility of grief. She creates, writes, paints, sings, leaves marks on the world that will outlast her body. She doesn't know how long she has, doesn't waste time trying to predict or control it. She lives every day as both a gift and a risk. She dies when she dies, but she lives. Until then, really lives, not just exists. And when the end comes, whether in months or years or decades, she goes knowing she chose her story instead of letting it be written for her. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she read. This was it. This was the story she wanted to live. Not a guarantee of survival, not a predetermined ending, but the courage to live fully in the uncertainty. "I choose this one," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. The blank book, the unwritten story. Celeste nodded approvingly. The hardest choice, and the best one. Are you sure? You can't come back. I'm sure. The moment Olivia spoke the words, the shop began to change. The other books faded, their ribbons dissolving like smoke. The impossible shelves drew closer, the architecture becoming more normal, more ordinary. The midnight itself seemed to shift, time resuming its normal flow. Celeste walked Olivia to the door. Outside, the city was still quiet, still hovering in that magical space between one day and the next. The book comes with you, Celeste said, pressing the blank volume into Olivia's hands. Write in it. Document your days, not for anyone else, for you. So you remember that you chose this. So you know that every moment from here forward is yours. Will I see you again? Not unless you need to make another choice. But I don't think you will. You've learned the secret now. Life is always a story you're writing, not a story being written to you. Olivia stepped onto the sidewalk, and when she turned back, the shop was dark. The lights were off. The open sign was gone, and in the morning, when she walked past this spot again, she knew there would be just a regular bookshop there, or maybe a coffee shop, or maybe an empty storefront. The midnight pages existed only for those who needed it, only at the moment of choosing. But Olivia had her blank book, and that was enough. She walked home as dawn began to break, the city waking around her, and, for the first time in months, she felt awake too, alive, present, uncertain of her future, but certain of this moment, this choice, this deliberate act of living. The next day, she called her doctor, got that second opinion, started asking questions instead of just accepting pronouncements. The path wasn't clear. Cancer never offered clarity, but it was hers now, navigated by her choices instead of fear. She reconnected with friends, awkward at first, having to explain where she'd been and why she'd disappeared. Most understood. Those who didn't, well, that was okay too. She was writing her story now, and not everyone needed to be in every chapter. She started painting again, something she'd given up years ago when real life took over. The canvases were clumsy at first, her skills rusty from disuse. But they improved, and more importantly, the act of creating filled something in her that had been hollow for too long. And every night before bed, she wrote in the blank book. Not a diary, exactly. More like proof. Proof that she'd lived that day. Proof that she'd made choices. Proof that her story was still being written. Some days were good. Some days the treatments made her so sick she could barely move. Some days she raged at the unfairness of it all. Some days she felt grateful beyond measure for the simple fact of breathing. All of it went in the book. All of it was her story. 5 years after she walked into the midnight pages, Olivia's cancer went into remission. Not cured, cancer was never that simple, but in retreat, held at bay by treatments and luck and sheer stubborn will. 10 years after, she had her first art show. Small gallery, modest sales, but people came and saw her work, and something she'd created moved through the world without her, living its own life. 15 years after, she fell in love, messily, imperfectly, with a man who knew about her history and loved her anyway, or maybe because of it, because they both understood that time was precious and not to be wasted on pretending. 20 years after that midnight choice, Olivia sat in her studio. She had a studio now, a real dedicated space, and opened the blank book that was no longer blank. Hundreds of pages filled with her handwriting, documenting 2 decades of lived moments. She'd survived, not just the cancer, though that was no small thing, but survived the trap of predetermined endings, survived the belief that her story was being written by forces beyond her control, She'd chosen. And then she'd lived that choice, day by day, moment by moment, writing her story one page at a time. The book was almost full now, just a few blank pages left at the end. Olivia thought about Celeste, about that impossible shop, about the choice that had changed everything. She wondered if others had found it, if they'd chosen their stories too, if somewhere in the city, a midnight bookshop still opened its doors to people who needed permission to write their own endings. Olivia picked up her pen and turned to a fresh page. She had story left to write. She always would, until the very last page was full, and when that page came, whenever it came, she would write her final words with no regrets, because she'd chosen this story, every moment of it, the pain and the joy, the fear and the courage, the endings and the new beginnings. That was the gift Celeste had given her, not a guarantee of survival, but permission to choose how she would live. And Olivia chose fiercely, chose fully, chose every single day to write one more page in the story that was uniquely, beautifully, impossibly hers. The blank book sat on her desk, a reminder and a promise. Life was always uncertain, the ending was always unknown, but the story was always hers to write, and she was writing it still.